Today's topic is TDK is acquiring the Niigata fab that belonged to JS Foundry, a Japanese power semiconductor contract maker that recently went bankrupt. It's a quiet deal, just a few tens of billions of yen, but it tells you a lot about how the chip industry actually works on the ground. As always, I'll explain everything in the most simplified way possible. Even a middle schooler should be able to follow along. If you're a specialist watching, some parts may feel oversimplified, but I'd like to prioritize giving everyone the big picture first. Think of today's story as a small pizza specialty shop that went out of business, and a big general food company quietly walking in and buying the whole building on the cheap. So sit back and enjoy. Here's today's news in one picture. We'll lean on this pizza shop and food company analogy all the way through the opening section. A small pizza specialty shop believed that pizza is about to explode in popularity and bought a whole fleet of huge commercial ovens. But the boom turned out to be much shorter than they expected. The ovens sat empty, and only the monthly rent and electricity bills kept getting heavier and heavier. Meanwhile, the food company that ended up buying the building wasn't just doing pizza. They were also making pasta, bento boxes, all kinds of dishes side by side. While the specialty shop bet everything on pizza only, the food company was set up to handle a wide menu. So even when the pizza boom ended, they could keep the kitchen running by simply taking other orders. Inside the shuttered specialty shop, the big industrial-grade kitchen equipment was still sitting there, fully installed. Building the same setup from scratch today would cost several times more. Materials are more expensive, construction labor is more expensive, everything is more expensive. So buying the whole building, equipment and all, was a much better deal for the big food company than building new from zero. Here's the takeaway from the analogy. The specialty shop concentrated too hard on this one thing is coming and got stuck the moment the wave receded. The big food company was set up to handle a wide menu, so they could keep the same kitchen running by simply switching what they cooked. It's not that one of them was right and the other wrong. It's that the way they placed their bets was different, and that difference decided who survived. So how do the pizza specialty shop, the big food company, and the industrial kitchen map onto real companies and real technologies out on the factory floor? From here, let me walk you through what this actually looks like in the real semiconductor industry. Two companies sit at the center of today's news. First, JS Foundry. This is a Japanese contract chipmaker that started in 2022, taking over a Niigata fab originally operated by the American chipmaker onsemi. They launched right in the middle of the EV boom, when expectations for power semiconductor demand were at their peak. But the business hit a wall, and JS Foundry went bankrupt in 2025. The other company is TDK, a major Japanese electronic components maker famous in Japan for capacitors, sensors, and many other parts. TDK is now set to acquire the land and the building of JS Foundry's Niigata fab. Reports put the deal at several tens of billions of yen, with closing as early as June. Let me explain JS Foundry first. JS Foundry was a contract manufacturing fab for power semiconductors based in Niigata. Power semiconductors are chips designed to control electrical power, the kind of chips that go into an EV by the dozens to drive its motors. Around 2022, when JS Foundry started up, the world was right in the middle of an EV boom. In the US, EV sales were growing roughly 50 to 60% year over year in 2023. The whole industry was talking about a coming shortage of power semiconductors, and JS Foundry was running their fab on exactly that expectation. But then the EV rollout turned out to be much slower than predicted. US EV sales growth slowed sharply to about 7% year over year by 2024. Going from plus 50 or 60% to plus 7% in just one single year, that kind of violent swing is actually pretty characteristic of the semiconductor industry. Meanwhile, China was telling a different story. Chinese EV makers rapidly started adopting domestic power chips from BYD Semiconductor, Star Power, and Cylon, and BYD even went as far as bringing power semiconductor design in-house. So the simple equation, EVs grow, therefore Japanese and Western power chip makers profit, just didn't hold up. JS Foundry was leaning heavily on EV-bound power chips, so when those orders dried up, fab utilization collapsed. And chip fabs carry heavy fixed costs, whether they're running or idle. Low utilization plus those fixed costs grinding on month after month, that's exactly the path that led to bankruptcy in 2025. Now let's look at where TDK stands. TDK makes capacitors, sensors, magnetic components, a wide spectrum of electronic parts. They sell into smartphones, industrial equipment, automotive, medical equipment, and many other areas. Because they aren't dependent on any single end use, when one segment softens, they can compensate with another. That structural difference matters here. What TDK is really buying here is the fab itself. Cleanrooms, the special spaces used for making chips and high-precision electronic components, are extremely expensive to construct. They have to tightly control temperature, humidity, and airborne particles, and building one from scratch can easily run from tens of billions to hundreds of billions of yen. The Niigata fab JS Foundry was operating already had all of that infrastructure in place, ready to go.
The cost of building a new fab has been climbing sharply in recent years. Construction materials are up, labor is up, energy is up, and the price of semiconductor manufacturing equipment itself is up. Against that backdrop, the value of existing fab assets is being reevaluated across the industry. TDK's acquisition is partly the story of how do you put a bankrupt company's assets back to work, but it's also the story of, in today's environment, buying an existing fab is often more rational than building a new one. TDK plans to use the acquired fab as a base for electronic components production and R&D, not to restart contract manufacturing of power semiconductors. In other words, the same fab building will be used for a completely different purpose than what JS Foundry used it for. It's the idea of taking an infrastructure asset and repurposing it for a different goal. Let me organize this for a moment. The direct cause of JS Foundry's bankruptcy was a sharp drop in EV-bound power chip demand, combined with heavy fixed costs. The reason TDK could acquire the fab cheaply is the combination of distressed assets trade below market price and new fab construction costs have skyrocketed. Neither side made a wrong decision in itself. This is what happens when forecasts about the future end up off by just a little in timing. Zooming out to the industry level, fab bankruptcies aren't rare events at all. Even when a fab is running real, modern technology, missing the demand wave is enough to choke the business. Contract manufacturing, the foundry business, is structurally dependent on customer orders, so the higher the concentration in a single customer or a single end use, the bigger the risk when that demand disappears overnight. Inside Japan, you have government-backed new fab projects like Rapidus moving forward on one hand, while on the other hand, you have fabs like JS Foundry quietly going under. The narrative of more chip fabs are being built, and Japan is making a semiconductor comeback grabs the headlines easily, but the shakeout happening on the ground at the same time rarely gets reported. TDK's acquisition also matters from the angle of preserving domestic electronic components manufacturing capacity. A cleanroom-equipped fab going derelict is a net negative for the industry. Another company picking it up and putting it back to work is a net positive. That said, calling this a direct comeback of the Japanese semiconductor industry is too clean. The use case is changing, so we should keep watching closely. Let me walk back through what we covered. JS Foundry was a contract maker of power semiconductors, running their Niigata fab on the assumption that EV demand would scale fast. EV adoption ended up slower than predicted. Demand collapsed, the heavy fixed cost base couldn't be supported, and they went bankrupt in 2025. TDK is now acquiring the land and building of that Niigata fab for several tens of billions of yen. TDK's intent is to use it as an electronic components production and R&D base, not to go back into power semiconductor foundry work. Behind it is the simple judgment that with new fab construction costs rising as sharply as they have, buying an existing fab makes more economic sense. The same fab looked like a crushing fixed cost block to one company and a cheap piece of infrastructure to another, all because their reads on demand pointed in different directions. Now for my own view. From 31 years on the factory floor,
I don't think predicting the future correctly and a company surviving are the same thing. JS Foundry's read that EVs would lift power semiconductor demand wasn't wrong in itself. The timing was just off, and they didn't have the cushion to absorb that timing gap. And the reason TDK is getting this fab at a discount is frankly because a peer company went under. The same story is probably going to play out in today's AI boom. The read of AI will increase chip demand may well be correct, but somewhere along the line, you'll see companies that overinvested trying to ride that wave end up in trouble afterwards. Reading the future correctly doesn't necessarily mean you get rewarded. That's just how the semiconductor industry usually works. That's all for today. I'll keep bringing you semiconductor news and analysis, so if you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This has been Ty on Semiconductor News Decoded.